So today we have anthropologist Dr. Nireka Weeratunge to speak to us on reflections on doing fieldwork in times of crisis in Sri Lanka. Dr. Weeratunge is a fellow at the International Center for Ethnic Studies in Colombo. She's also a member of the Scientific Steering Committee of Integrated Marine Biosphere Research, Canada, China. She's the lead qualitative researcher on, how do you say it, Nireka, S-E-D-R-I-C, Cedric?
I was.
Okay, was.
Cedric,
that is,
yes.
Yeah, that is social, ecological dynamics in rapid economic development, infrastructure and coastal changes. Southeastern Sri Lanka, a project which was running at ICS. So, I think I would like to talk about Dr. Weeratunge's work going back to about 2 decades for the benefit of all young researchers who are here, because this is our learning platform. I think we got to know her through her specific research, which was on the aspects of ethnicity and gender among the Rodi of Sri Lanka, a well-researched and widely read piece of research during that time. So this is on a community of suppressed class, or rather caste, among the Sinhalese community. From here, she has moved on to different areas. Her recent work has included a research on small-scale fisheries and aquaculture, land tenure, social and cultural aspects of natural resource use, particularly focusing on livelihood, strategies in relation to poverty, vulnerability, resilience, and well-being in fishing and farming communities. She also worked on land ownership and women's empowerment in Sri Lanka. She was the principal investigator at ICS on the migration and collective networks as pathways out of poverty, gendered vulnerabilities and capabilities among poor fishing communities in Asia, a project that went on from 2016 to 2019. So Dr. Weeratunge's first degree is from the University of Brandeis, which is in sociology, and master's from the University of Birmingham in anthropology, and a PhD in anthropology from the University of Toronto in Canada. So Dr. Weeratunge has about 20 joint papers and is well indexed. You could see the diversity in her work from the slide. What is really very interesting about her research career is not only her work is diverse, but she has worked in many places in South Asia over the last 30 years on the interface of gender, environment and development issues in the Asia-Pacific region. She has worked in Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Cambodia, China, Laos, Myanmar, Solomon Islands, Philippines, and the Vietnam. We are happy to note that she's also she has a long-standing association with CEPA. There's a CEPA staff on the CEPA staff, as well as a member of CEPA from as early as 2001. So, Dr. Weeratunge, I warmly invite you to talk to us today about the topic, very timely in the learning process, on reflections on doing field work in times of crisis in Sri Lanka. Over to you, Nireka.
Thank you very much, Dr. Indika Bulankulama, for that very extensive introduction. And good afternoon to you all. Of course, I'm honored to be back at CEPA, giving a presentation. I haven't done that for a long time, since significant part of my career was at CEPA. what I'm going to talk to you falls under this whole reflections theme, and it's very much reflections rather than, sort of a theoretical kind of presentation. I'll be looking at some of the conceptual and practical issues in terms of doing field work in times of crisis. And it's, it's actually a good opportunity for me also. I mean, we've all been doing research during the last 3 years, but it's a good opportunity to sort of take a step back and think about it together with you. And I, would like to obviously get some feedback on your own experiences during this period. As I guess, I'll do the presentation and we can discuss as we go along. Okay, so I'm going to share this screen here. Okay, so reflections on doing fieldwork in times of crisis in Sri Lanka. First of all, when we talk of crisis, for me, the first thought that came to mind when I was, sort of preparing this presentation was, when was there a time when I wasn't doing fieldwork in times of crisis? In fact, my whole career since because I, graduated as an undergraduate, in 1985. Since then, there has always been in crisis in Sri Lanka. So if we start with the civil war in 1983, I was 22 years old. That was, doing fieldwork in times of crisis. Then came the tsunami, which was another crisis. And then, we had the end of the war there, but maybe it wasn't a crisis, but it precipitated crisis, this whole triumphalism and authoritarianism that followed the end of the war from 2009 to 2015. And then we had Yahapalana, where there was also crisis. For example, the bond scam, right? And then we went on to the Easter Sunday bomb attack, 2019. Again, we were in crisis. Then came COVID, crisis again. Then the economic crisis, which is, happening right now. So, when was there a time without crisis in Sri Lanka? And I recall, at this time, how during the Civil War, this was in early years of 2000, I was doing field work in Trincomalee district. This was a period when the war was intensified. The Air Force was bombing, the LTT camps in Muttur. I was sitting in an office. The windows were rattling there, from the sound of the bombs. And then, I had to go to a village, coastal village, to interview a young woman who had been trained in a micro-enterprise program. And as I got there, I don't speak Tamil very well, so I had a translator. First of all, getting into that house was an issue because, they were doing some construction. And so, of course, the translator was a well-recognized teacher in Trincomalee district, and he talked his way in there without a problem. We sat and we started doing the interview, and then, the story came out that this young woman's father had been shot by the army 2 months ago in a crossfire between the two forces. And here I was, a Sinhalese researcher sitting in a Tamil Hindu household, where the Sinhalese army had shot, her father, and, the whole ethical aspects of it, the whole, issues of dealing with that trauma. All of that was part of crisis, from the time, we went out in the field there. And what was interesting was that, despite that trauma, despite the fact that, we were enemy communities, this young woman actually invited us to have rice and fish curry, which was the only thing they had right there for a meal. But they insisted that we shared that, And so, crisis, building rapport, shared humanity, these are, some of the issues that come up in terms of crisis. How you can actually go about doing field work. Then there's the whole issue of travel restrictions. At that time, we had travel restrictions going into the area that was held by the LTT. First, we had to get permission from the army to leave government-held territories. Then we had to inform the so-called other side that we were coming. And I went for another project into a village which was held by the LTTE. And we were interviewing in a household, and we had almost finished when the young LTT carders came on motorbikes and circled our house. And then the owner, sort of invited them in. And these were young boys from 16 to about 20, 23 years. And they came in and they all got Coca-Cola, Coke, because that was what they were serving us. And then, the interesting thing again was, these people didn't ask me about why, there was bombing going on outside, why, their livelihoods were in such a bad situation, why, they were suffering. Their question was, what do the people in the South think of us? That was the question. And here was a war going on, crisis, livelihood issues, not enough food, scarcity, all of that. And their question was, how do people in the South perceive us? So I think there are a lot of issues that come up and questions that we can ask of ourselves in terms of doing fieldwork in crisis and of relevance. The issue of relevance. So considering that, we had so many crises, in the last years, how different are the recent COVID-19 pandemic and economic crisis from previous crises? One of the things is that the earlier crisis affected specific regions and populations disproportionately, especially the North and the East. These were easier perceived as consequences of acts of violence or acts of terrorism or acts of nature. COVID and the economic crisis have affected the majority of the population, irrespective of region and social group, although the ability to cope obviously has varied with class and so on. Certain social groups have been disproportionately discriminated during COVID. And here, we can think about the Muslims, fishing communities and fish traders because of the Paliagoda cluster and so on. The recent crises have generated a widespread fear psychosis, anxieties, and have been used as means of social control by the state, leading to increased authoritarianisms. Now, this was experienced by the people in the North and the East previously, but now it's, everybody has experienced it. All crises in Sri Lanka are a result of political failure to work towards a democratic, economically stable, and just society. So a natural disaster such as the tsunami is a shock, but it only becomes a crisis due to political incompetence and corruption. So this is sort of the wider, political economic context of the crisis that we are facing when we go into doing fieldwork. Now, fieldwork within the qualitative research cycle, and I'm going to focus on qualitative research because that's what I do. So we have these stages of fieldwork or in the cycle: design and planning, data collection, data analysis, and dissemination. And we think of our fieldwork approach already in the design and planning stage, and then we actually do fieldwork during data collection. And fieldwork for me is grounded in the anthropological tradition. Anthropological fieldwork was historically part of a qualitative research cycle centered on the principles of ethnography as a holistic method and text. And ethnography originally was to capture a whole way of life. Anthropologists, of course, have moved beyond that and are more, topic focused now, but we always keep in mind that holistic context of a way of life of a people. And fieldwork is also a process of primary data collection by immersion within a community and a space. And again, especially working on development and research, the period of immersion in a community and space has become, shorter and shorter. But the principle is there that, you're not just doing an interview, but you understand the context in which that household is located. And the outcome of fieldwork is the data, we are concerned about the data of the quality, that the data is of quality, that we are producing data of quality, and which is based on in-depth knowledge of that particular subject in that particular unit of analysis or household or whoever you're interviewing. Now, the main constraints and challenges in recent crises have been, number one, inability to travel to fieldwork sites due to lockdowns or fuel crisis. So as I said earlier, during the war too, we had travel restrictions, but they were very localized. Here, we have during the lockdowns, we had, real problems getting to field sites. And then after that, the fuel crisis meant that, it was, and it still is difficult to plan on getting enough fuel to get to a place. The other second issue is the whole aspect of social distancing that came with COVID-19 and, masking. And the third aspects of these recent crises is stigmatizing of specific social or political groups. Now, stigmatizing or, discrimination has always been there, but different groups get stigmatized at different times. So, so within this, new crisis, we had, as I said, the Muslims, the Fisher community, and then, right now the whole Aragalia activists. These different kinds of groups have become stigmatized by, the state or usually, promoted by the state or initiated by the state and political groups, dominant political groups. So my COVID story in terms of traveling was, I had to go to Mathara to do training of a research team in University of Ruhuna, and to do sort of practice field work and to pilot tools. And they had arranged for me to stay in Mathura town. And just as I went there, Mathura town went into lockdown. So they, instead quickly shifted my sort of accommodation into interior Mathura district, somewhere in a, sort of rainforested area with in a local destination wedding site. And I occupied basically, what could have been a honeymoon suite or something, just me by myself with nobody else, eating, very limited eating out of a very limited menu. And, that was my accommodation for this fieldwork visit. And then, we had to negotiate between getting to the coast and getting to the university, which was okay. But I was just worried that I could not get out of Mathura district and was, trying to find all kinds of sort of routes out of the interior Mathura out into the Uva province or something. So it was a very interesting experience in terms of, personal, involvement and how you deal with uncertainty, because that is the issue with the crisis. There's a lot of uncertainty. Okay, so to get into the impact of crisis on fieldwork as a process, the kind of challenges that, I and we as research teams faced, first of all, was research in terms of research ethics, the training of the research team, pilot testing, sample selection, rapport building, and the sense of place that we try to capture when we do research. So in terms of the research ethics, timing becomes very important. So as you know, there are periods when there is like lockdown or, whatever, and then there are periods of opening up. Then in terms of the current crisis, there were periods when people were all standing in lines. And, if you went into the field at that time, you're not going to, it's not sensitive of you. It's basically unethical because people are more concerned about other things, and you cannot, impose on them. And you have to follow the do no harm principle there. Then another aspect of the ethical, research ethics is providing information or obtaining permission from gatekeepers. So during COVID, when it was difficult to go to, say, the divisional secretariats, the GNs, and to obtain permission to get interviews, in a community. This was all face-to-face before, but now we had to do this virtually. And often because government officers still needed to have that face-to-face, they were much more reluctant to do virtual interviews or conversations than, say, NGOs or community-based organizations. Sometimes this obtaining permission and providing information about the project was done by more inexperienced location-based research assistants. So one of the issues was that we had to recruit people who were based in the districts with the travel restrictions. So this was being done by more inexperienced people. Then the other issue is informed consent from research participants. And as you know, we, face to face, we explain the people about the project and ask for their permission and their consent to participate. And we, assure them of anonymity and so on. And all that had to be done virtually. So that was a set of challenges. Then the training of the research team. The entire training was virtual. So that means that, you had to do, were not able to do field-based exercises, like in ethnography to go and, observe something and take notes. That was not possible. Then actually to go out and do practice interviews, not possible. So a lot of this was done as role play in Zoom sessions. God, what are these groups called in Zoom? Breakout rooms, right?